Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the webinar series, specifically during COVID times that we run here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. I'm your host, Deva Rangarajan, and today we actually have a very, very interesting speaker from across the pond. We have Sven DeLabey, who is a partner at SimonKucher, a global consulting organization on strategy and pricing and other marketing-related issues. Sven actually runs the Brussels office. So Sven, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yep, it's a pleasure.
Indeed. Sven, one of the things that we have is we have this kind of the webinar series, which I put up together to see what's happening because of COVID and what's happening to the sales organization and stuff like that. And when you agreed to actually talk to me about it, and I thought to myself, what is SimonKucher known for, or where did it all begin? It began with pricing, right? You began as pricing consultants. So I just thought to myself, let me talk to Sven, and I keep saying Simon. Let me talk to Sven and hear his take on how you're dealing with customers who come to you and talk to you about how their salespeople are dealing with pricing related issues. So essentially your customers are now saying, give us price reductions. We do not know what is happening, or we cannot pay on time. So tell me about some of these issues that you hear a lot from the sales side when they deal with their customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in mid-March, when the crisis broke loose, the lockdowns came in place. I think that was the time that many companies or executives felt that they were being pushed out of a plane without a parachute. I mean, it was from one day to the next, you went into crisis management and cash flow management. The type of requests that then we received from clients were completely different, very short-term focused. In other words, what should we do tomorrow, as of next week even, to survive this crisis? How do we use pricing as a lever to get out? And one out of many things that has proven to be a pretty successful lever is services. Value-added services. This has always been a topic. We have been mentioning that in the good times also to companies. We have to monetize much more the value-added services. The reaction that we very often got was, this is part of the offering. So we sell you a product, and the services are part of the deal. We're not going to price them on top. This is, for instance, in engineering companies. You would sell a specialty product, and this product would be formulated by a PhD in chemistry. The product would be tested on the job site. There would be technical issues. People would be flown over even to these companies, and all that was included sometimes in the price of the product. That has changed in recent weeks. Because we know that in general, price sensitivity on services is lower than on the product itself. And so if you're looking for a way out in the crisis typically meaning that customers are more price sensitive, you need to find other ways. You cannot recover this on the main product. It's very hard to push through a price increase on your runner SKUs, because that's where customers expect to find the price increase. And so on these services, we had quite a few success stories on companies actually looking at that aspect to find some additional margin when the rest of the business was under pressure.
Actually, that's a great point, Sven, that you mentioned, is the fact that you talk about value-added services, and even under normal circumstances, companies should be doing it, but typically what happens, they give away services for free because services are seen as a cost center and stuff like that. So one of the things that challenges from a sales perspective that I've faced in the past is, yes, we want to sell services, but your sales force is used to giving away the service for free, right? And if this is short term, how are you going to change the behaviors of your salespeople? Because from an organization perspective, I can see that I want to charge for services, but how do I get my sales force to actually toe the line and pass this message to the customers?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one to install in a matter of days. This requires more time. So the main thing you need to do is set up a kind of value selling mindset. You need salespeople to understand what are the competitive advantages of the company, so the real reasons for purchasing, and then try to monetize these. And this could be value-added services like technical support or lab support, as I mentioned. And to be honest, here you're absolutely right. This is super difficult, and the salesperson that is used to offering this for free now suddenly needs to argue why this is a paid service. That's the harder services to be monetized. And that you can only achieve with training and potentially with versioning. Versioning meaning either you continue the relationship with the customer then without these services, or you pay for them, or you have a kind of transitionary scheme where you start paying a bit for the service and then over time you try to increase the price. To be honest, these are not real quick wins. Another type of services could be quick wins. Like for instance, we saw a case where a company started charging for paper invoices sent by post. They said, look, the crisis has taught us one thing, and it is digitalization. So as of now, you can still get your paper invoices, but we will charge you €50 per invoice. Not really with the intent to get a lot of money out of that service, but also to proactively start changing behaviors on the customer side. And these elements are easier to rationalize for the salesperson than, for instance, the case where suddenly the technical support would be payable.
Now, Bill, sticking on to that point, do you think that it's easier for you to convince your salespeople to sell these services by maybe varying the service levels? So what do I mean by that is that if I say technical support, in the past, you could actually fly them over immediately. But now you could tell them that, yes, if you want it for free, you can get it for free, but you have to wait till the technician or the person can fly in after the paying customers have done. So thereby you pass on the responsibility to the customer to say, how long do you want to wait? Is that also an option that can be used with your salespeople, that varying the service levels, because your cost to serve goes up every time you want to provide an extra service, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think 2 years ago, for the smallest technical problem, some of these engineering companies took the earliest flight to support customers for sometimes ridiculously small issues. You could indeed start to really differentiate the service levels, and you could say if you have A, B, and C customers, and so key accounts and customers in the long tail, you could actually make a kind of service policy even, where you say my key accounts, so my base load in my production and really a large chunk of my revenue, they have a key account manager, and we will not charge for the first X interventions on site. They have access to technical support. We will do the lab analysis for them. We can even do joint research projects if that is relevant in this business. Then you have the B customers. That is more difficult. I mean, if they have a potential to become an A customer over time, if you can grab more share of wallet, it would still be rationalizable, to offer them some services. But I would be more strict already. And then, of course, on the long tail, you could either offer them some remote support. I think now support over Zoom and Teams will be also used more often. But an on-site visit would, of course, be payable for these customers. So I think, differentiating service levels by type of customer or customer segment would make a lot of sense here.
Indeed. One of the things I heard from one of the participants in one of my programs was the fact that they said they were actually trying to condition, they were using COVID as a way of conditioning the customers, just like you said, where they said that they are now going to start actively sending out invoices, paper or digital, telling the value of the service, but say the customer pays zero. So is that also something that you are beginning to see companies proactively doing it? Because when I mentioned this as a practice, a lot of people say, oh, wow, but I guess more and more of these companies now are going to use COVID to actually start managing the expectations of the customers, right?
Yeah, we always say step 0 is to offer the service.
Yeah.
Step one is then to communicate the value of all the
Yeah.
services that you give to your customer, and step two is to monetize them.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely a great idea to start communicating all the value you offer to your customers, and especially if you give a wide range of services that is still included in the price
Yeah.
of your products. It is even more important to be very transparent to customers about all the added value that you create. So that's absolutely the right step. Keeping in mind that this is not the end point, because
Yeah.
you are communicating but not yet monetizing. So
Yeah.
the next step is to really earn what you deserve, I would
Indeed.
say.
Sven, one of the things that there are many one of the things I keep asking you, but I think I'm glad that I have you and I can ask you all these questions. Is this idea that, let's say you've exhausted all options of for the short term. Let's say you want to make you've looked at not core very important services. You want to change the behaviors. You're trying to send out invoices. You're trying to look at your profiling your customers ABC and start setting standards there and everything else. But in all this, it is the role of management and sales management. Doesn't have to be sales, but management has to play a much more active role rather than just push it out to the salespeople. And do you actually think that this price increase, price decrease, price that we have to pass on to the customer should go hand in hand with how salespeople need to be evaluated? You see what I mean? In terms of coming up with this kind of motivating the salespeople to go out there and talk. What extent do you think that is important? Short term, definitely in the long term, but even in short term, that sales management or management has to step in to protect the sales organization?
Yeah, evaluate it, but in my view, also support it.
Yeah.
So I think as a management, you should first support your salespeople through a price increase campaign, and then afterwards evaluate how they have done. And this may be a bit shocking, but very often price increases in companies are decided in budget time, where they say we expect an inflation of 1.5%, so let's try to do a price increase of 2.5, and with a bit of negotiation, we will reach 2%. And then people get a target, but that target is basically a company target. It is not transferred down to customer segments or products. And I think the very first thing that the management should do, and this could be prepared by a pricing manager, for instance, is to prepare a price increase in which everybody believes. So not just a top-down target, but really a price increase target that is, let's say, quantified based on even at customer product level, to be honest. The most successful companies prepare price increases at a customer product level. And they do so by looking at the importance of the customer, the estimated reaction, the price elasticity, if you want, the strategic importance of the product, but also the price sensitivity of a product. In other words, if a customer is buying 10 products and one product is already 80% of their purchasing cost with you as a supplier, increasing that price will probably be difficult. The purchaser will spend a lot of time looking at what is happening on the price, potentially asking for a second and a third opinion. But these other products that are in the long tail, they typically receive less attention. So there is more potential. And we always say if you do a linear price increase, 2% is probably too much on that runner SKU and too little on all the rest. So I think if you prepare this very well, your salespeople will be much more comfortable in putting that in the market. And of course, then afterwards, you can evaluate them, because if you have given them the tools and really prepare something that they believe in, then they should also execute. And you could then incentivize them to deliver, let's say, a price increase realization of 80 to 85%.
But for me, but what would your recommendation be for those companies that don't have a pricing manager? Because for every big organization that has a pricing manager, there are also companies where it's like, I'm guessing this price and how my customer is going to react. So to what extent do you think, and what would your recommendations be for those companies that do not have a pricing manager? Of course, the obvious answer is going to be get SimonKucher to come and help you out. So apart from that, what specific suggestions would you make in those kind of
Well,
situations?
I will not claim that every company needs a pricing manager.
Yeah.
Um, I've seen businesses highly successful on pricing, where, for instance, a sales director or a marketing director was
Yeah.
taking control. I think the key success factor is to have the roles and the responsibilities clarified. So, and yes, if you have a pricing manager, typically the roles are more clear because you have a person that is looking at the pricing. But you know, the pricing manager is not implementing the price increase campaigns. Also, in these businesses, you need people that can be held accountable or that feel responsible for implementing the price increase. So it could very well be the sales director making a proposal on where to increase prices. It could be the marketing director from a product perspective, putting some pressure on where there would be opportunities for increasing the price. And in some other businesses, I have seen functions like a commercial controller that was looking after the price consistency of the business, and actually identifying price increase opportunities for the salespeople. So the function itself is much less important than the clarity of the roles and the responsibilities.
And I love this answer, because essentially what you're talking about is that I'm also looking from the viewpoint of if you have a marketing director, in some companies it's just a sales and marketing director in one role. Somebody has to be doing it, right? So essentially, but I like the fact that even if I have a sales and marketing director with one cap, they still have to partition that role, because the sales manager has to understand how this price increase has to be push through my salespeople with the capabilities of my sales organization. How can I maybe play the good cop, bad cop, where the salesperson goes and plays the good cop and the sales manager says we cannot give that price? But the marketing angle should be, how do I communicate the extra value that we're bringing, right? Because in my head, even though it looks like the sales manager is doing it, but it is the marketing side of things to understand the value, because the value is where we are now talking in terms of not just that customer, but how that customer is comparing your offer to the closest competitor. So you need to come up with a value messaging that, you know what I mean? And I love this answer that you gave, because I can also take that answer and say sales and marketing could be clubbed into one role, especially in B2B companies where marketing role is mostly set aside for Marcom rather than the marketing that you're talking about here, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, the role of marketing in a price increase is also super important. Typically, a marketing director would be responsible for making sure that the salespeople have the right value arguments, price defense in their pocket to really explain the price increase. Because the last thing you want to do is blame a price increase fully on the cost. Because in some businesses, next year costs go down, and then the customers will come back, right? Absolutely. So I mean, it needs to be value pricing. It needs to, I mean, you need to make sure that your salespeople fully understand the value, can deliver a compelling value selling speech, and that is typically the role of a marketing organization.
Fantastic. Now, one more question on this short term, and then you always have ideas about long term. What should we be doing about pricing as well? Long term strategies. Now, how do I do this for a global organization, Sven? So, for example, you see what I mean? So I'm sitting locally. So you're sitting in Belgium. You're advising a lot of Belgian companies, but their headquarters could be in Germany, or it could be in Japan. It could be in the United States, where a lot of times pricing is set by pricing managers who might not necessarily have an idea about the market conditions in your local geographies, right? So in those kind of situations during COVID, what do you see as some best practices about passing on short-term pains or dealing with short-term pains in pricing?
The short term from a global perspective is a bit more difficult, to be honest. Because to give you the best practice on global price management would be that you define a kind of global reference price where you really look at the value of your products. And this would be a consistent price list fully based on the features or the value drivers of your product, which you would then translate into national or regional price lists based on local competition and local trends. If you have this global price list already now, you can use it to really act very quickly and say, okay, in that market, demand is dropping, we need to react. How do we do that? Or let's take a positive example. In another market, there is suddenly a huge demand for a product that we produce because it is needed to fight the crisis. How do we then manage the price increase, or how do we manage better capacity and demand? If you don't have this global reference price list, then it would be more difficult to coordinate an international price campaign, because then basically all the markets have typically built their own traditional price list based on their own methods and their own feeling of where the price should be. And that is, of course, let's say, inducing quite a lot of risks, because one country might panic, the other might keep prices stable, triggering, without knowing, potentially some cross-border movements from one country to the other. So here the message may be sad, but if you don't have it right now, it's probably a bit late, and you need to manage consistency country by country.
And I think I can also tie this into your first point, is that you standardize your price on the product, but you vary the price based on the service you deliver locally, right? You could say, here is what we're looking at, and then how we try to. And I think it's absolutely right, because if you're not careful, it could also mean that the customers will start comparing prices. And it's just not for the COVID, but even after the COVID, they'll go back to what you had before, and not having a consistent price. They're going to say, why am I paying a lot more now? Whereas if you had a service, you can justify that difference in price because of the services that you delivered as well. So now that we are talking, so I'm sure that we can talk for hours about the short-term strategies and how you have in different kind of businesses. But I'm more interested also in hearing long-term. What does this mean, Sven? Is from your experience, so we have the short-term things we have to take care of, but from a long-term perspective, what is your advice to some of your customers about pricing and price management?
On the longer term, I think the advice hasn't changed too much compared to before the crisis. When it comes to building very solid foundations on pricing. And surprisingly, if you would ask companies today how they price, the majority would still say we look at production costs and we add a certain target margin. And that leaves a lot of money on the table. And that was the case before the crisis, and it will still be the case after the crisis. So starting from a good understanding of what is the value of the product, and then pricing for that value would be a first step. Once you have that list price, you can of course start thinking about how do we now make that a customer specific price? How can we better help salespeople in negotiating prices, right? You have a list price, but when you are especially in a B2B business, you typically don't sell at the list price. And then the next question is, what is now a good net price? How to which level should I negotiate? What should I offer? Because if you look at a typical business, you would find many different price points for very similar customers and very similar products. So how can we identify what are the best practices in a given situation? What is a good price level given this type of customer in this type of market buying this type of product, and giving better guidance on what should be the right net price level given a list price that has been optimized using a value-based approach.
And I think one of the things, would you also be suffice to say that companies which have been forced because of COVID to rethink their classification of ABC customers, that has to become the norm moving forward, because you really cannot go back and justify a different price later on. That what started out as a short-term exercise now has to become the norm, saying that your A customers cannot get the same value as a B customer, cannot get the same value as a C customer, right?
Absolutely. That's a very good point. And many companies indeed started building a new way of segmenting their customers. And some companies were forced to do so because they were almost in a luxury position. They had to, cut down their capacities to 30%, 50%. So that's not maybe a luxury position, but what I mean is that they couldn't serve all their customers anymore. They had to prioritize which customers they would serve in that reduced capacity situation, and which one they would have to let go or serve a bit later. And so many companies started thinking about, okay, how should we do that? Because it might be easy to say, let's do only the key accounts, but the key accounts typically have very good prices. So that's also good for the margin profile, right? And
absolutely.
Actually, we have some of these smaller customers, but they're only small because we have a very low share of wallet with them. So if we would now prioritize them, can't we then capture some share of wallet of competitors? So what should we now do? Serve the biggest customers or the smallest one in the portfolio? And that has been a basis for really looking at what is a value-based customer segmentation.
Indeed. And I really like this answer as well, because one of the things I tell a lot of people, and I would like your opinion on this, is that digital transformation, whether we like it or not, is here to stay. Yep. Is actually, this is the point where we have to start being open to digital transformation, saying that a key customer that we would have visited 10 times before, but we have 80-90% share of wallet, we don't necessarily need to visit them 8-10 times, right? That you can actually reduce your cost to serve by making it 3 or 4 times, do EDI, and then, or you know what I mean, or use an inside salespeople to pick up the phone and call them. Yep. Thereby freeing up the time of the people to focus on what we would call B customers and C customers. But you know, the way of reaching out to your customers using tools like account-based marketing to communicate with your customers rather than physically going and visiting them. To what extent do you actually see some cutting-edge companies beginning to rethink the way their whole sales strategy, the marketing strategy is transforming the processes?
Yeah, we see that happen more and more. And indeed, I gave the example of technical engineers taking the earliest plane to go to their customers. This is the old world. And I think what we see now much more is that, let's say, an account management has changed. It is no longer that many visits per week. You're no longer going to, let's say, evaluate the salesperson by the number of visits he can physically do per day. So it is much more a mix of, yes, you still need some physical visits to build a relationship, to visit maybe the factories or the offices of the customer, to have maybe even workshops or, let's say, meetings that require physical presence, but these are becoming more and more exceptions. You would complement that with video conferences and calls, much more so than you would used to even before COVID. And this has really accelerated in the last weeks and months.
And do you think that in the long run, sticking to sales, that pricing discipline is going to become one of the KPIs that salespeople are going to be evaluated against? You know what I mean? That most of the time it's not seen. We talk about lists being given, we talk about sales enablement tools to be able to go communicate value and everything else, but still the focus still is on, are they making the sale, yes or no? Not so much on, are they having a pricing discipline including things like, do you stick to your price? Do you justify your price? And more importantly, the quality of your visit reports, because if your pricing manager needs to update the pricing and it's based on the value of my offering, that has to come from some sort of feedback from the field, right? So to what extent would you recommend increasingly pricing discipline in whatever format it is has to become part of the vernacular or the language that sales managers should be using with their salespeople?
Yeah, if we talk about evaluation metrics, we come very easily to incentive schemes. And if you look at many incentive schemes, you would find revenue as one of the main KPIs in such a scheme, which is a good start, I would say. But one of the disadvantages is that revenue can mean a lot of things. It could mean a huge volume at a very low price, or a very small volume at a very high price, and that may be not the strategy that the company wants you to implement. So what we see more and more in incentive schemes is a decoupling of these KPIs. So you would have a volume target, and of course a volume target in isolation is even worse than a revenue target.
Yes.
But you would complement that very strongly with also a price index or a price performance index, where you would basically say, look, you have a volume target and an expected price realization rate. And that means that, yes, you can secure some deals at a relatively low price as long as your overall price performance is in line with expectations. So, you're not going to create an incentive scheme that tells a salesperson this is the volume target and you have to sell everything at this price, because price is a very situational factor. Sometimes you want to give a lower price because you believe in a future volume, or you are facing tough competition. So you still need to give freedom to the salesperson, but you can make a KPI overall. Across a year, there should be a certain pattern. And if in that pattern you see consistently low prices, then the volume can be as high as you want it to be. It is probably not the performance you want the salesperson to achieve. So indeed, by decoupling these KPI, you actually give more attention to price realization than when you just have a revenue KPI.
And Sven, but how would you then reconcile this further? Because price realization is only price realization on the value of the product that you're selling. What if I give away a lot of services for free? So I have a price list, I'm keeping my price realization, but ultimately I'm doing it by giving away a lot of services. So on paper, it looks like I have my volume targets, I have my pricing targets, but man, ultimately in terms of true margins, right, we have price leakage, right? You have all that kind of stuff. It's not a price leakage, but more like margin leakage at the end of the day. How do you try and capture that as well? Make sure that you're being smart there, but we have to just be an extra bit smart to take care of the extra smart salespeople. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. What do we do with services? It could be a specific KPI in the incentive scheme where you say, look, you have a target of, let's say, having a monetization rate of at least 80% of the service you offer. To be honest, it's probably not waterproof because you would still have salespeople that offer services without putting them on the invoice, so it would be hard to track who has received which service. So that's a very difficult one. You could consider having, for instance, a target percentage of revenue. So you would say the volume times price target is 100, and the service revenue should be 4 to 6% of that. To be honest, it's not ideal, it's not waterproof, but at least to the majority of the sales organization that is really in line with reaching the company targets and really has the best feelings for the company, this would give a strong sensitivity to go for it and would steer them towards really paying attention to service monetization.
And what are your thoughts on just saying, okay, all the things that you said, plus the quality of your visit reports, because the quality of your visit reports will say a lot of things that are being discussed, right? Because essentially, fundamentally, in the past, we've never had the activities of the salespeople being monitored and stuff like that. So wouldn't it sort of make sense that if you can, but I think in the long run, organizations should be considering this, right? Because they should be looking at all the things that you said, harmonize your price list, make sure that you decouple the KPIs, make sure that you try to set targets specifically for services. And even if it's hard to track, then make sure that there's also visit reports where we say, this is what the customer has asked. What have you proposed? You see what I mean? In that way, we're trying to bring more and more, which then means that my KPIs now become a lot more activity based, because already by saying that it has to be with services, it has to be with this, you're already moving towards how do I proactively sell these? You're talking the salespeople be behaving in certain ways. What are your thoughts on that?
Difficult question, because you want visit reports to be of high quality, and the moment you put that in the incentive scheme, it becomes a bit more subjective. You know, volume targets, price targets, service monetization, these are facts. Quality of a report, who is going to assess that? It could be the direct superior, the N+1, be it the regional sales manager or a sales director. But we are always a bit hesitant to include in incentive schemes the more subjective elements. Having said that, it is indeed absolutely important to have high quality visit reports, and there may be other ways to incentivize that without including it in the bonus. It could, for instance, be a part of the training when you onboard new salespeople, to stress the importance of having a good customer intelligence, and of course visit reports are a key part of that. Or it could be emphasized on regional sales meetings. We had a client, for instance, where the visit reports were actually actively used as case studies on regional sales meetings to show the richness of what comes out.
Wow, indeed.
And the importance of filling it in, the evening after the visit and not 2 weeks later.
Indeed. And my last question for you in this session is, to what extent do you actually see, I love this, you talk about role plays and visit reports kind of stuff. To what extent is pricing, and I've heard companies not use the word price increase, but they say value adjustment, saying that our price is finally catching up for all the value that we've given in abundance before. To what extent actually do you see companies beginning to use more and more role plays and coaching of salespeople dealing specifically with pricing related issues and justifying the prices that we talked about? You actually see this happening more and more?
It is very often a component that is integrated in sales meetings as well. I think I've attended quite a few sales meetings where you have 20, 30 people from all over the world, often to the same location to do experience sharing. And typically there's always a training component on this, where you would have a typical mock negotiation trainings. So that means that one salesperson would be the buyer and the other one would be the seller, and they have to strike a deal together to learn how to use value argumentation in the beginning, then moving towards potentially concessions before talking about price decreases and discounts. This is something that we see occur more often in the last months, but not all companies are pursuing.
Well, Sven, I know that you have so much experience. You could be talking on this for hours, but thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure that our audience here will take a lot away from this particular session. So thank you so much for your time.
Yep, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.